The SNP has found itself at the centre of another scandal, this time over the use of parliamentary postage. Rishi Sunak is coming under mounting pressure to suspend the candidates investigated for betting on the day of the general election. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has made another trip to Scotland to boost the campaign. Is this a sign the party's making Scotland a focus? This is Planet Holyrood.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
Hi, today I'm joined by Andrew Quinn and Hannah Rodger. So a bit of an interesting story to talk about and to explain first of all. And yeah, the SNP getting into a sticky situation. Forgive the joke, over stamps. So Andrew, tell me a wee bit about this so that people can understand exactly what this is about.
Yeah, so as broken by the Daily Record's political editor, Paul Hutchin, some SNP staffers used their parliamentary expenses to pay for postage and stamps over some general election campaign leaflets. Now, that's not allowed because it's essentially using taxpayers' money for party campaigning. But I mean, I think the big deal out of it is that these people who did it, the staffers, actually messaged about it and were saying, oh, they were asking each other, can this be traced? And one of them said no, so the others went ahead with it. So basically, they were aware of what they were doing. I think it would be easy to make a mistake because it's kind of confusing, but because they were aware of it, it doesn't look very good for the SNP.
So although this is over stamps, Hannah, right?
Sorry, I was just going to say to Andrew, you're being very, very kind there, saying that it's confusing. Like, I'm sorry, that's a load of nonsense. It's not confusing. Everybody knows you're not supposed to use any parliamentary money to pay for any political activities, leaflets, drinks, whatever. You're just not meant to do it. It's like probably the first thing you learn as a political, employee on day one. But anyway, sorry, what were you going to ask me, Lorna?
No, but I was actually going to ask you something very similar to that. I obviously you are aware, and certainly us within the media are far more aware of what the rules are in relation to campaigning during a general election. But do you not think the public are going to see this and think it's all a bit silly? Is that fair or not fair?
I mean, they might think that, but I would argue they shouldn't. And I include us in that as well. We are ordinary members of the public. I'm sorry, but I don't want my taxes going from doing my job to be paying for Jeannie McSweeney to send 20 leaflets out telling people to vote for her. Like, that's not acceptable. And I think, while it is a sort of, I don't even know if it's comical that it's about stamps. It is a sort of low level, let's just say fraud, because if they have been found to be doing this, then it is fraudulent. I don't think that they should have been, but there's
an investigation obviously ongoing at the moment.
Yeah, like, so I don't want to end up in jail by defaming anyone here. But I just think it kind of adds to this narrative that we're already sort of seeing. People are kind of disenfranchised with politics. They're fed up with politicians. They think, oh, yous are all in it for yourselves. And, as we're going to probably come on and talk about anyway, it's the same with us Tories and the betting stuff. They're just clinging on by their fingernails, and they're still trying to make more money for themselves out of the last thing that they can possibly do. And I think it just gives the public the impression that everybody's at it. And I think actually for democracy, that's a really, really bad place to be in, because for democracy to work and function, we need to have the public engaged in that.
Absolutely. It's also tricky for the SNP at the moment anyway, who, you know, are still embroiled in Operation Branch Form, which, you know, the former chief executive, Peter Morell, has obviously been charged with embezzlement, which is fraud. So anything with fraud connected to it, you know, in the perception of the public is going to be tricky, isn't it, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the party is pretty skint at the moment. So you kind of wonder if that's where the thinking came from behind it. They were like, they're not having enough money to campaign. I mean, I know of some SNP MPs in the past who've had to foot bills because the party wouldn't give them anything. So yeah, it really doesn't look good. And I think, yeah, a lot of people think there is corruption within the SNP. Obviously, there's an investigation. Peter Murrell's been charged. But yeah, it definitely does not help their look of being in it for themselves. And yeah, but as I say, the messages were pretty bad, because obviously that offered them a chance to kind of get out of it. They could use, Hannah is right, it's not really confusing. I was more meaning confusing for the public. But at least they could have used that excuse, or we didn't know about it, and they would probably be not telling the truth. But they can't even use that. They've really been caught red-handed. And as far as I'm aware, it's someone in their own party who's reported it as well.
Well, you know what? Good. Like, you can say, right, it was wrong that they were doing that, but actually it's somebody from within their own party who's looked at that and gone, actually, no, this is wrong. You know, so good for that person for doing it, because I don't think actually in politics there's enough people who are willing to put their necks on the line to expose wrongdoing.
No, and yet we are seeing it a bit more, as we've seen it with Douglas Ross. So, you know, clearly there are people who there is a red line, and they are prepared to actually, you know, blow the whistle, as you say.
Yeah, I think it shows there are a lot of people who are probably in politics for the wrong reasons. They're in it for themselves. But there are still a lot of other people who aren't, a lot of people who want to make the world a better place and believe in public standards. But now it's coming to those folk need to really stand up at the moment, and obviously this person has done.
I think that is the problem with it for all parties, particularly in this general election. It is about integrity, it is about trust, and it is about, you know, not telling lies to the public, because I think we're all sick of it now. Yeah. We've had too much, and it doesn't actually matter what your colours are. And I suppose that's the danger, as you said, Hannah.
Yeah, I think as well with this issue, right? This thing with the stamps. I mean, it even sounds stupid talking about bloody stamps, but anyway, the issue with the stamps has the potential to really, you know, really impact the SNP campaign. You know, if they stay silent on it, they don't say anything. You know, what we hear all the time whenever there's, and again, it's the same with the Conservatives and the betting stuff, you know, oh, there's an investigation ongoing, we cannot say anything because we don't want to prejudice, blah, blah, blah. I think that's not going to cut it. We're in the middle of a general election campaign. The party needs to come forward, be completely transparent and say, right, okay, we've, you know, whatever way they're probably going to have a scapegoat for it and pretend that, you know, senior people were unaware. This happens all the time. But, you know, they do need to be honest and say, right, we've identified this. This is the action we're taking. You know, these are the, you know, candidates who benefited from these stamps or postage, and they're going to repay the money. You know, I think that is now what they have to do in order for this not to, I mean, yeah, it will tarnish their reputation in the very short term, but I think, you know, this is just going to go on for the rest of the campaign, and they're going to keep getting questions about it if they don't just come out, you know, and say, we got it wrong. And however they want to kind of explain it is up to them. But I think just hiding behind an investigation is not going to do any good at this point.
No, well, not after the investigations that have gone on for a long time in relation to fraudulent expenses claims and everything. So,
well, that's the
you're
thing.
right.
I just think, see, unless it's a criminal investigation, like I
You
think
don't need to be quiet.
of oh, I don't want to prejudice an investigation. I'm sorry, but it's not a criminal investigation. There's no contempt issue,
No.
So just say what has happened.
But of course, as usual, we know that parties are very reluctant to then identify who, well, the possible MPs are that have benefited from this, because of course then, they could be potentially at greater risk of losing their seat.
But then see if they don't, it risks tarnishing
Everybody.
all the candidates, because right now we don't know, is this central SNP campaign materials? Is it individual candidates who have been handed?
Specific, yeah.
No, there's too many things here that are unclear, and it shouldn't be up to journalists to sort of, dig in and sort of really like pull out little strands of information. It should be the party just being upfront about it now, because they've been kind of, as Andrew said, caught red-handed.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, Andrew? You and Hannah do these kind of stories, and I don't see any lessons being learned in how to handle, these kind of stories, which, anybody with any sense who's involved in journalism would tell you that you deal with it fast, and you, as Hannah says, you actually come clean as quick as possible and move on, because there will be another story, the next day, the following day, but otherwise you're risking this turning into 2 days, 3 days, 4 days.
Well, yeah, I think the SNP have a real problem with that. They've done it on several occasions. They did it with the Sunday Mail, with your great story about the membership figures, where they lied. They just dug their heels in, and eventually they get caught out. They've done it with Michael Matheson. They refused to sack him as a cabinet minister initially, and now they're refusing for him to resign as an MSP. So I think they have a little bit of a feeling that the media is very much against them. Maybe not all of the SNP, that might not be fair, but there is definitely a feeling within the SNP that the media is very much against them, and the media is pro-union. And I think that's part of the thing that contributes to it. So it makes it a little bit conspiratorial for them. They kind of, they dig their heels in rather than dealing with it and being upfront. And I mean, Labour, when they were in power from 1997 to 2010, they had quite a few bad issues, and Tony Blair was pretty ruthless in certain cases because he knew how bad it would look in the media. So like, he made Peter Mandelson, who's one of his close colleagues, resign twice, and they pretty much didn't investigate it. He wasn't bothered about an investigation. He was like, "You need to go," and he just told them. But it seems like the SNP aren't bothered about the PR of it and are more bothered about themselves.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting as well, Andrew, what you're saying about, and I do know what you mean, this sort of idea that, it's the unionist media and you're all against the SNP. That is, I'm sorry, but absolute rubbish. It's because the SNP are the party of government in Scotland. They're the biggest party, and they've been in government for a long, long time. So I'm like, who else do you want us to ask about the problems that Scotland is having? I'm not going to go and ask the Labour Party, who haven't been in power for 15 odd years. It's the SNP, and of course they are going to come under more scrutiny. And I think that there needs to be they need to stop being as sort of precious about it, but also stop taking things so personally and taking it as a sort of unionist or independence issue. It's the journalist's job to scrutinise government and hold governments to account, regardless of what their, position is on the Constitution.
No, absolutely. And I mean, we're journalists first and foremost.
Yeah.
And, it's always about the story. And yeah, we don't like being lied to.
No.
And everything comes out in the wash. So let's hope they don't tell any porkies in relation to this. But another, to be fair, Rishi Sunak is certainly up to his neck as well, because again, he is refusing to suspend these candidates, while saying that they're being investigated for this betting scandal, which obviously all relates to the date when the general election was called, and these 4 individuals who are accused of placing bets. Some of them are on leave of absence. There's a husband and wife. There's a former police officer who I think was Rishi's security detail. And you just think, again, exactly what you said, Hannah, that saying, we have to wait for the outcome of an investigation, and but if that finds them to have been guilty of wrongdoing, then I'll throw the book at them. Well, as you say, we're in the middle of an election. You need to deal with it right now.
Yeah, I think as well, I think for Rishi Sunak, it's pretty idiotic to not suspend these candidates or withdraw support, because he's only going, say if they get elected and then the investigation concludes, because it's probably going to conclude after the election, say they get elected, then he's going to end up with 1, potentially 2 MPs who have broken the law before when they've just get in the door. If that's
so it just continues the bad news stories.
Exactly.
And Andrew, what did you make of what he said obviously last night in the debate about that? He was obviously trying to take control of it, but he's been trying to take control of a lot of things, and it's been difficult.
Yeah, he's trying to take control and say that he was annoyed by it. And I mean, I can definitely imagine he was absolutely fuming, because he's very thin-skinned anyway, and he does get quite annoyed. But he's not saying he's going to do anything about it. I mean, and that's what matters. Yeah, the candidate should be suspended, but he's not going to suspend the guy who was his PPS because it's his mate. And I think that's as clear. And he wouldn't do it before. I mean, everyone knew Dominic Raab was a bully. It was pretty clear. There were so many folk who'd come forward, and Sunak kept saying, we're waiting for the investigation. And then eventually he asked them to resign. But it dragged on so much that there were so many stories that just harms them. It's like they have no understanding of how the effect this has on their public image, which, I mean, is crazy to me. They mustn't speak to normal people, because normal people talk about these things and think it looks pretty badly. So I think it genuinely makes him look really out of touch. And yeah, the public think that's pretty bad to be, even though it was £100 bet, which for an MP isn't tons of money because they're pretty loaded. But it's just the whole principle of it. You shouldn't be betting on things when you know what the result is going to be. It's just cheating.
Well, it's just so, as you say, it's small amounts, or small amounts to them. But it just seems like making more money before Rome collapses again.
It's
really tawdry. It really is. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's just stupid. I mean, Craig Williams was particularly stupid. Like, he bet on it using a digital account with his name, and that's how it got flagged up. I mean, like, do you want this person being an assistant to the Prime Minister if that's what they're doing? You're clearly... It's just very, very stupid, and he himself should say he's not going to run. But
that's another good point. Yeah, these people should actually withdraw or resign, or But again, nobody seems to take responsibility.
Yeah, and I don't know what the need for an investigation in that case really is. Sunak should just go, and Sunak knows all of them. He should ask them, "Did you place the bet? Yes or no?" It'll be yes, pretty much, because it wouldn't have come up otherwise, probably. And then he should say, right, you're suspended. That's it. He can do it all over the phone. Could be done within 5 minutes, but he doesn't want to deal with anything, so it's not going to happen.
No, maybe he's also sitting there waiting to see how many others are likely to come out the woodwork, because I think that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, that's a possibility, because the Tories have said in their comment that there is a small number of individuals who are involved in this, but they haven't said how many. So a small number could really be any amount, because it's relative. They haven't said what it's relative to.
Yeah, what is a small number in comparison to the entire population?
Yeah.
So,
You know, what
it
I'm
could be
fascinated
more.
by, though, right, with this betting thing, not just the way Rishi Sunak has, you know, roundly mishandled the whole saga, but actually how many people clearly did know that the general election was going to be called. Because the first, I think, really rumblings of it were probably very late on the 21st. And then, it was the 21st. And then, you know, obviously the morning of the 22nd. But up until that point, it was kept really, really quiet. And normally, like, Andrew, you'll know this, like, normally in Westminster, if there's even like a whiff of a rumour, it just goes round like wildfire. So I'm actually quite impressed that, you know, apparently it seems dozens of people knew that he was going to call an election and it didn't kind of leak out.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because I had heard about it from the night before, but like not for definite, of course. And then I went into the office the next day, and I'm in a shared office with folk from different publications. And I'd said about 8:30, I think I'd said, oh, someone said this, and they were like, oh, that's not reliable. But then just before 9 o'clock, Chris Mason from the BBC went on the Today programme and said, look, I think it's a goer, pretty much. The Tories aren't denying it. And then that's when it all scrambled into it. So yeah, it was only really getting taken seriously by folk from about 9 o'clock on the morning they announced it. So yeah, you're right. It's quite mad that more folk didn't know about it.
Didn't leak out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Andrew, you work in Westminster normally. Hannah, you've worked in Westminster. I mean, how, I suppose, you know, certain members of the public might be interested to know how many people would actually know? I mean, are we talking, you know, single figures, or, you know, would it be the cabinet, or?
No, I don't. The cabinet wouldn't know. Cabinet wouldn't.
So how many people would actually have that kind of information, possibly even the day before?
I would. Sorry,
no, you go after. No.
Yeah, I would say a very small number, because you wouldn't be able to trust folk in cabinet not to open their mouths. Is honestly the truth. So I think it would have to be less than 10 folk would know. I mean, that's a rough estimate, but there would have been some journalists who are so close to the government that they would know as well. But again, that's a pretty small number.
But they maybe forgot what job they're actually doing and didn't publish it.
That sounds like a woman who's been there before. But let's talk about Keir Starmer, who's made another trip up here. Obviously, Angela Rayner's been up here a couple of times as well. So it does look as if he's paying a huge amount of attention to Scotland, which is interesting. What do you think's behind this decision? Is it for public perception that he wants to be seen here, that, you know, he believes that should they win a large number of seats, and obviously if they win down south, therefore form a government, that Scotland is very much going to be a huge part of that government?
Yeah, I think, you know, Keir Starmer has said previously, you know, years ago, in fact, I think it must have been when he became Labour leader, and he said the road to number 10 for Labour has to run through Scotland. And fair play to him, he's always kind of stuck by that. You know, he's not assuming, at least this is my view, he's not assuming that the support in England will guarantee him a place in Downing Street, even though all the polls are showing, you know, amazing results for Labour. I don't think he wants to accept that that's enough. And I think he realises, you know, he does still need support in Scotland. And I think, you know, he quite clearly is getting support in Scotland as well, looking at the polls. But I think that it's, you know, I think that it's quite good that he has come here, and Angela Rayner's come twice as well, because it just shows, I think it will show people that actually they are interested in Scotland, and it's also about the Scottish Labour Party, you know, even though it's a separate sort of entity, it's not completely distanced from the UK Labour Party. I think it's good for Anna Ass to be seen to be with Keir Starmer and at events and things. So, yeah, I think it's good.
And I think there's no doubt that, you know, recent things that have happened in Scotland have influenced Starmer and how he is dealing with some policies. I mean, you know, we can talk about the GRR, but he shifted his position on that somewhat. You know, he clearly, you know, finds it difficult to actually articulate it and reference Tony Blair, obviously, in relation to what is a woman. But, you know, he shifted, and I suspect that he has looked, you know, at that situation and what happened in Scotland at the beginning of the year and thought, right, no. And obviously they look as if they will possibly have a number of Scots in a potential cabinet. You know, if Ian Murray is still, you know, he's currently shadow Scotland minister, but if he will have a huge role to play. Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it does look like quite a few Scottish MPs could have big roles. Obviously, Ian Murray and Michael Shanks will be hoping to be in there because they're currently in the Shadow Scotland office, so they'll hope to move on. But we've also, there's a lot of big figures there, like Douglas Alexander, who's a former Shadow Foreign Secretary. Are we really saying that Douglas is going to go back and over the next 5 years not expect to get a government job? I mean, I'm sure they'll be trying to use him. There's Kirsty McNeil, who was a special advisor to Gordon Brown. She's a candidate in Midlothian. I mean, I think a really interesting candidate is Imogen Walker, who's standing in Lanarkshire. Now, she's the wife of Morgan McSweeney, who's Labour's campaign director. Now, he's perhaps the most important unelected person in Labour at the moment. He's really been a key part of Starmer's team. So, I mean, that could be part of it, part of the reason why he's coming up. But he knows there's a lot of really, I guess, really experienced candidates, people who will almost definitely be in government. And I guess he's said that himself, hasn't he? He's kind of admitted that some of these Scottish MPs will be in government. And it is a Labour tradition. I mean, Scotland kind of punches above its weight in the Labour Party, and over the last 124 years that the Labour Party's been going. So I guess he acknowledges that.
Do you not think, though, I mean, I know we're probably kind of running out of time and this is a whole different conversation, but me and my colleague John Ferguson were speaking about this a few weeks ago. You know, obviously, as you're saying, historically, Labour Scottish MPs have had quite kind of predominant roles in the Labour Party, but since devolution has, you know, expanded and Scotland has more devolved areas, could we still expect to see, for example, a Scottish MP being the health secretary? Yeah. You know, when technically they wouldn't be like. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they would be then involved in making decisions in relation to England. And,
England and Wales, and not Scotland, where they actually live.
But I suppose there's an argument, you want the best person for the job, you know, no matter where they live. And I think that's definitely, we need smart grown-ups in the room now. So we just need to wait and see for the next scandal to come along. Listen, thanks very much, you two, and thanks for listening. And Planet Holyrood, the podcast, can be found on the Daily Record YouTube and on Spotify.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.